Welcome back for another video, and today we're going to do something a little bit different. If you follow me on Instagram, you'd know that on Instagram I do informative content, but something I definitely use my page for is every athlete I've ever had do a meet, I do a recap on. And usually I not only recap the meet, but I like to give some coaching insights of something that maybe within prep that was a bit insightful, maybe something we're going to change moving forward. Anything to kind of give the coaching lens of kind of what I've learned and what I want to basically manage or change. Um, but for a specific lifter, Preston Savoy, who's a 110 kilo lifter, who's a pro power lifter in the USAPL. When I went to go do his meet recap, I was like, this probably would be a really good video. And so rather than trying to do like an essay long write up on Instagram, which I don't think would do justice, what I wanted to do instead is just do a YouTube video case study, really kind of going through his training, what we did leading into the Arnold where he competed, some things that I kind of looked at and some variables that were at play with kind of decisions that we made. Because, and frankly, as we're going to get into, it was a pretty short prep. I had just started coaching him, so there was little time to experiment. We're going to look at kind of what we did technique-wise changing into the meet. We're going to be looking at kind of what I thought went well leading in, what didn't go well, some feedback from how the meet went, and then really get into what were the small adjustments and the adjustments we're going to be making going forward. So I'm going to try and actually do this all in one take, as it's not really like the same normal informative content. I'm really just going to kind of talk through all of my thoughts, recapping what we did. And if you like this video, Sean Noriega on Powerlifting Now, actually his video coming up for the month of April is going to be a case study on one of his lifters. We're going to be doing this frequently on Powerlifting Now, whether it's an actual video or talking about it on our podcast, which we're actually going to be doing some case study overviews on the podcast for April as well. But without further ado, let's kind of get into like talking about Preston and being able to kind of go over first, what were some variables coming in that that went into play of like decision making of when I first started coaching him. So I've actually got 9 listed. I've got a little note section up here that I'm gonna be reading off of. The single biggest one to notate is he was a equip lifter converting to raw. Now he has competed raw occasionally over the last couple of years, but he is now fully converted to raw powerlifting. He was a lifter at University of Louisiana Raging Cajuns, where he was the equipped national champion last year in the collegiate division. And after that and graduating, he decided to go full-time in raw powerlifting, where he competed at Raw Nationals in Vegas and placed 3rd in the 110 kilo division, where he earned his pro card and then now is doing the Arnold. With that being said, he had only ever done equipped programming. Even when he was competing raw, he was doing the equipped program that was coming from the coach at Louisiana. So for equipped, that might be very pertinent, but within what I was looking at when he first came to me, it was very different. I mean, just to give a couple examples, he would bench twice a week. On his secondary day was supposed to be in a bench shirt, but he converted for raw by just doing a what's it called, the slingshot press. I think he may have used something different, but slingshot press to kind of mimic a bench shirt but not be in a bench shirt. He had never really deadlifted. Up until his last 2 preps, he had actually not hit a deadlift in training, and deadlifting on the platform is the first time he did it. I believe I might have this slightly incorrect. I think it's correct. Leading into Raw Nationals last year, he only did 1 single deadlift the entire prep, and he tried, I believe he went for a 700 deadlift 2 weeks out and he missed it. And then I believe he hit it or got close to it come national, maybe hit like 315 or 312. Then he did a meet after that, shortly after, where he did train deadlift a little bit more in training, but overall, he kind of just hadn't deadlifted. Again, going back to the equipped style versus the raw style. So a couple other things is he's a 110 kilo male with great squat and bench leverages. We're going to go through a lot of videos of him lifting prior and during the meet. Great leverages for that. Not so great deadlift leverages. That's kind of been the lift that plagues him. He squats more than he deadlifts, and you're going to see kind of why and what the troubles we are running into. And so what this is leading to is he's unlike anyone I'd ever coached before. Not only had I never coached someone coming from an equipped background, we didn't have much training data since the program he was coming from was an equipped training program. And albeit there were some things that I did take from that, kind of looking at workload, we definitely had to make some pretty big structural changes on what we do and how we went approach things, because he had never really done a regular squat on a secondary day. He was always doing something like a manta ray squat or a front squat. On benching, he was doing the slingshot or using board presses stuff. And then, like I said, never really deadlifted in training. So stuff that's very different from what I program for anyone else. And then his leverages and his body weight was very different from anyone I coached. So I really didn't have a lot of good comparisons to go off of, because a lot of times when you get a new athlete, one, you're looking at past training data. Two, you're looking at other lifters you coach or have coached that fit into a similar mold as that person that you're coaching. So you can kind of get a framework of, okay, this person like on squat is very similar to X lifter. This person is very on bench, very similar to X lifter. Whatever it may be, you kind of plug and play to kind of have a framework of, okay, I can see some similarities between these lifters, and I'm going to be able to use them as kind of a template for how to apply my system to this new lifter. The next thing, kind of continuing further with kind of the differences in how he had trained prior to working with me, he had never done a heavy squat single in prep. He had only done rep work, and the first time he'd ever hit a true like heavy single was on meet day. And while I have some lifters that might do something similar to that, most people I have are doing some form of single to be able to kind of get an idea of testing and get an idea of kind of where their strength's at. So he had never hit a heavy single in training, so he didn't have any data or experience to be able to go off of that. He had also never done really any lower body quad accessory based work. Had never done leg press or hack squat or belt squat or anything like that. When you see him, he is a mammoth of a human being. I'm gonna talk about it in a little bit, but he's very comparable to Ashton Roska. If you look at Ashton and you look at Preston side by side, they look like they could be twins, at least body type wise. So it's absolutely insane the amount of muscle mass Preston had, and never really doing any type of lower body accessory work. He had also never been coached directly one-on-one before. He had had a coach when he was at Louisiana, when he got into equip lifting, but had never been coached directly one-on-one. He also came in with a prior existing injury that's probably going to be a lifelong thing, is that he had, I believe, it torn his meniscus in high school. Maybe it was in some sport. I forget exactly what that entails. But still to this day, that gives him issues to where he's able to train around it, and it really doesn't cause too much of an issue. But it does cause some swelling occasionally, and you're going to see when we go kind of talking about his technique, or you look at his lifts, he has a fairly wide stance squat, which likely comes back a little bit to the equip background, but two, it comes back to the fact that when he goes narrower, that knee does bug him. So that wider stance is something that's a little bit of a adjustment to kind of find pain-free movement, and has worked well for him. And the last variable to go over it was a short meet prep, as I already mentioned. We started working together sometime in November, and unfortunately, the first block we had together really didn't get much traction. He had a lot of life circumstances and things that kind of came up, so we really didn't get much from that. So we really had 3 blocks that were, let's see, I believe. 5 weeks, 4 weeks, and 4 weeks leading to the Arnold. So about 14 to 15 week meet prep of actually gathering good data and having good consistent training that I can kind of take from. So it was just a very short prep. So again, I'm taking this lifter that has not nearly as much training data to go off of, is not comparable to many people I've coached before, and has a lot of variables that we got to play into. And with a short meet prep, we kind of just had to say, okay, here's the framework. We're going to give it a shot and see how it goes. So now that we know the variables, we're going to just start getting into kind of the recap of everything, and a lot of just this is going to be screen recording. So first, let's get over to Preston's Instagram account so we can kind of see what his lifts look prior to working with me. So here's a squat from Raw Nationals where he squatted 322 and a half, 711 pounds. So you can kind of get an idea of his stance, positioning, and whatnot. Okay, so we see that. Here's another side view. I think this is a pause squat set. Okay, so when we're talking about technique changes when we first started working together, the only real thing I wanted to look at with this squat is at one point he used to squat a bit narrower. I think you can see here it's a little bit of a narrower squat stance. And that was really the only main thing, because I mean his squat was his best lift along with his bench. For the most part, if we're looking from the side view, it's pretty technically sound, no depth issues. But looking at that narrower stance, it just kind of bugged the knee. So really, all in all, we did not change much with squat, because I think a lot of what he's done to self-align his technique is exactly why he's so strong. It's one of those things that you see an elite level lifter and you say, oh, it looks a little different from what most people look like. Maybe I want to change his technique. And we're going to experiment a bit. But when we kind of find out, it's kind of like, okay, this is how he was able to get this athlete versus it being like he's doing anything wrong. So squat, for the most part, we really didn't change too much. He was pretty solid there. Everything about it I was pretty happy with, and I don't think technique was a limiting issue. For his bench press, let's see if I can find a good video here that'll show it. Even when he would bench raw, he still had a lot of qualities from equip lifting. He tended to be a pretty externally rotated. That doesn't look too bad there. Let's see. I think this one maybe shows a little bit more. He tended to be, yeah, I can see a little bit more here. He would tend to be pretty tucked. He had a closer grip. He would touch pretty low. All qualities that are going to kind of work more with a bench shirt. And so the biggest thing we worked on when we first started working together is being a little bit more internally rotated with the hands, having those elbows not flare, because he does feel stronger with a slightly closer grip than most people, but having the elbows be a little bit more stacked under that wrist joint, and then changing to that higher touch point. And it was a bit odd to him at first because, again, he had always benched in a bench shirt. He knew nothing different. I think this video shows a little bit of the tucking as well. You can see a little bit more tucking there. And so we did make some adjustments as I move up here. With kind of his grip position, you can see the grip is a little bit more internally rotated. You'll see the touch points a bit higher. Elbows stacked pretty well underneath. And one of the biggest things we got rid of is he would, not rid of, but got better, is one of his biggest issues would be lockout with that left side. His triceps are strong. There's not an issue with tricep strength. Some people say, oh, lockout, we need to build the triceps stronger. Well, this guy does slingshot bench with 605/4. He doesn't have weak triceps. What would happen is he would overly tuck that left side and wouldn't kind of get it to flare back over the shoulder. So he kind of gets stuck on that left side as he pressed. So we were really trying to work, and you can see how much better that left side is here, in the sense of kind of staying internally rotated, those elbows staying under the bar, and not really having that issue. And 501 PR moved incredibly easy in training, and we'll get to meet prep in a bit, and even post meet, where things went super well. Deadlift, though, is his problem child. You can see not too many posts here. Deadlift, the biggest thing is he has a very strong stick at his thighs. So actually, you know what? I've got some videos here. Let's pull them up. So here is a video. I believe this is 287.5, and it was his final heavy deadlift of prep. And you're going to see what happens here. He looks like he can deadlift 800 pounds off the floor, but then has a very strong sticking point at his thighs. I think he messes with hook grip a bit here. He also, I should note, he does hook grip. He does not feel good when he does mixed grip. He kind of resets it here a bit. Wasn't feeling it. Okay, so positioning off the floor looks decently well, and then boom, super strong stick of the thighs. Like I said, flies off the floor, no issue. Honestly, for the most part, positioning right there isn't too bad. Looks pretty solid. He gets a little bit posteriorly rotated and tucked, which is one of the issues here, because he gets about right here. You can see his glutes and hamstrings are pretty much fully contracted, and then all that he has left to do is that extension, and he's kind of stuck. And so part of that is positioning off the floor. And one of the biggest things we tried to do is learning the slack pull, because again, he had never really deadlifted in training. When I was trying to teach him how to slack pull, it was a very foreign thing for him. And honestly, this lift here was pretty solid in regards to that compared to where we were, because it wasn't until kind of that final block, really the slack pull aspect and kind of cueing that, we started to find some things that worked for him. It started to get a lot better, but really still had issues with that lockout. It wasn't going away. Let's see if I can pull some other videos up here that kind of show this as well, or show some issues. So let's see. Oh yeah, this is his third attempt come meet day. And actually meet day really helped me to kind of self-align or figure out kind of what some of these issues were. So you're gonna see here, third attempt on meet day. Not too bad off the floor. Boom, hard stick right there, loses it. He was completely fine. He just fell forward because of balance, wasn't passing out or anything. But again, just super hard stick right there. It looks easy, as you can see on his second attempt here. Let's pull the second attempt up. Yeah, so second attempt deadlift, this is 300 kilos. That third attempt was 315. If you look at this, you'd very much assume he has 315, and I know he has 315 strength-wise. It's just a matter of that lockout. This view right here, and this is probably my fault for not having him get a really direct front view in training enough times at like a heavier weight, because a lot of it was we were mainly trying to work on the slack pull and positioning off the floor. And so I got a lot more side views to work on that. And then I kind of didn't have him get enough front views. But as I mentioned, he's jacked. Those biceps are huge. You see him in person, and it's even more impressive. he has a pretty close grip here, which isn't necessarily wrong per se, but we have two things that happen here. One, his hands will get stuck on his thighs a bit, which that is an issue, but I don't think that's honestly the main, it's partially it, but I don't think it's 100% the main thing. The biggest tell here is notate right here, literally his arms are so close and his biceps are so huge, he has to bend his elbows to get his arms to come around his body. So he's literally fighting to get his arms around his body and having to spread them out. And you can see right when he does that, bends the elbows, hands get stuck on the thighs. That's where that hard sticking point is. We'll come back around to that, the meat video. It's about right here. Obviously, this isn't straight front for you. Can see, okay, elbows have to unlock, hands get stuck on the thighs. You can see those elbows actually unlock there and can't get through that. So my initial thing when I saw this is like, okay, we've improved slack pull. Positioning off the floor is definitely better. Not perfect, but better than it was. What happens if we start to we change that grip length? So he actually did a little YOLO deadlift post meet. And while I can't say this is definitively the answer yet, because he was using straps, it was on pound plates. I don't think that the plates and bar made as much of a difference as maybe straps made a difference. But we can see here, and I'll play the full video, notate how different his lockout is here with that wider grip. Now, he gets stuck a little bit, and I honestly don't think he was super strong on this day because he just competed 3 days before, and we're going to get to his deadlift programming in a bit. Deadlift is something that fatigues him a lot. But notice, same position here. Glutes are pretty much contracted, hamstrings contracted, and now he just needs to extend at the back. But he was never able to do... Why do you not want him to play? Yeah, I don't know why it's not wanting to play now. Either way, he had never been able to get to that point right here and then grind through it. And since I don't have a front view, I can't really see what's going on there, but I very much assume is one, I don't see his elbows having to unlock there. Like right here is usually where his elbows had to unlock, and I don't see any part where they had to. And then two, I'm sure his arms and hands are on his thighs right now, but they seem to be in a position where he can now grind past that versus having that hard stick. So that's one of the biggest technique things we're going to do moving forward is change that grip. He has already notated it feels harder off the floor, but that's completely fine. We need to distribute some of that difficulty off from that lockout to off the floor so we can be more even now. It looked like he probably could have pulled 800 off the floor, but he can barely lock out 700. So we need to find a happy medium to where, okay, he can pull 750 off the floor and he can lock out 750. No true like huge sticking point that holds him back. So that is deadlift, and we'll come back around to squat and bench a little bit with some videos of how the Arnold went once we kind of get through it. So when I first started working with him, you can see, I can't really see fully here. So we've got a couple blocks here. This is the first real block that I consider us working together. Like I said, that first block just didn't really get much traction. So this is the first block. So we have here a primary deadlift or squat day on Sunday, primary bench, and primary deadlift. The reason being is that is the one day he could make it to his school's powerlifting gym. The other days he works as a personal trainer at a commercial gym, and frankly, especially for squat and deadlift, that just doesn't work very well. He squats way too heavy, and to use pound plates on whippy bars was not going to work. And then deadlift, one of the biggest issues is he couldn't hook grip at the gym. And so trying to work on technique when he hooks grips, and that's what we need to work on, is that kind of singles practice. He couldn't do that. So we moved it all to that Sunday to kind of load up the stress here. So you can see here we have our primary squat day, primary bench day, primary deadlift day, and then some accessory work. Tuesday was a light bench day. This is where we introduced a third bench day because, again, he had never even benched more than twice a week, and really had only benched truly once a week since that secondary day was always like an equipped variation. Wednesday was his secondary squat day where we did high bar squats, and at first a secondary deadlift day. And then Thursday was his, or this was his tertiary bench day. Sorry if I said secondary. This was his secondary bench day where we did try a slightly wider grip because I just want to try. It is decently strong. He still feels better with that slightly coaster grip. I think his pinkies are on the rings or slightly inside of the ring, so his wide grip is ring finger on the ring. So we have our secondary bench day here. So some biggest things to note is with competition squat, we would have a top set, but all back off work would be percentage based. The same thing would happen on his primary bench day. We'd have top sets RPE based because he had never done RPE training before. We're RPE based, and I give him a range. And then his back off sets were percentage based. And then deadlift again, he'd have his top sets, back off percentage based. Tertiary bench day, all percentage based. For his secondary squat and deadlift day, though, he had an RPE top set, but it was percentage-based back off work for the reason of, one, we didn't have percentages to do on high bar squat, but two, they were lower RPEs. And then for deadlift, we were doing only ascending sets. So I give him 2 percentage-based ascending sets up into a top rep set. And then lastly, for his secondary bench day, we would do RPE with back downs based off of that top set, because again, this set wasn't going to be as high RPE, so I wasn't too much of an issue of that intensity driving up too high. The primary day, the reason I did that, is I kind of just alluded to it, is I want to be able to push those top sets, but not get that average intensity on the back downs going way too high, because I just wasn't sure what he could handle. He's obviously a really, really strong guy, and when you're pushing these heavy weights and you're making these big jumps weekly, that is going to, if you're making 10 to 15 kilo jumps in your top double each week or top single, that's going to make massive jumps on those back off sets as well. So I wanted to kind of standardize those a bit more based off of training maxes. So things we learned pretty quickly. One, he could not deadlift twice a week. You can see here, deadlift was okay on this main day. It was okay on this first Wednesday, 225 by 5. That should be very easy for him. And look what happened. 225, 10 RPE by week 2. Learned very quickly he cannot be deadlifting twice a week. Again, no prior real deadlift training, or didn't really have much past training data on deadlift training. So I wanted to see what would happen, and it became very evident very quick. Deadlift only once a week. So block 1, after the second week, we already switched to going to a model of just deadlifting once a week. I'm not going to go entirely into every little detail of how he did, but this block went decently well. Ended with a 315 double on squat, which I believe was a PR. Ended with not a PR bench, but moved super well. And then deadlift was still an experiment. We were doing a lot of singles because we needed, if we use straps, his technique would change, and we needed to work on that singular rep. So you can see we did singles, followed by some back down singles, and then for the volume, do some rep work. Going into block 2, so we only had 3 blocks leading the Arnold. I wanted to be able to test singles because I just didn't know how he was going to respond to them. He had never done them before. I didn't know what to expect. And at least with this short meet prep, one of the things I was going to be doing is he competed on a Sunday. So I basically was setting up this block to act like this week 4 Sunday was meet day. And if it went well, I was like, okay, next block, I'm just going to recreate the same setup. We're just going to do a slight pullback after week 3. And then week 4 Sunday is just going to be his meet, and we're going to recreate that. And this block went pretty darn well. He did singles for the first time ever. He built up. He hit a 330 single that was hard, but had a little bit more in the tank. His best ever single in a meet's 330. So I was like, all right, if we are able to kind of use this as a baseline and just pull back a little bit more versus doing the regular Wednesday workout, I bet we could peak and get a little bit heavier single and plan for like 332 to 335. Deadlift, he hit 305 in training, missed 320 that day. Again, one of those things where strength-wise off the floor looked good, but was just hard at lockout. So I very much figured, 1, we need to continue to improve technique, but 2, if we just pull back that week 3 a bit more, maybe he's going to feel a little bit better going to that week, or in week 3 going into week 4, because the biggest thing he'd note on deadlift is when we deadlift heavy or we deadlift with more workload, either twice a week or just a lot on that Sunday, low back fatigue built up really easily for him and would be an issue. And then lastly, bench went amazing. I already showed you the video, hit that 501 bench even after hitting a PR double on this day. So I was like, all right, bench, we're just going to keep kind of just training into the meet. We don't even need to really pull back because it's getting every single week. So going into the last block, I was like, let's rerun a very similar template. We're going to run singles here, bench, very similar setup, singles on deadlift. Unfortunately, singles sputtered out on squat. Did not have the same performance. He hit 320 the week before, and it was probably harder than the 330 that was in the gym. And then come meet day, wasn't a terrible day, but we hit 320 again. That's about all he had. And as you'll see in the videos we're going to show, deadlift wasn't bad on meet day, but again, we ran into those lockout issues. And then bench was fantastic again. We followed the same protocol with bench. You're going to see that there was very little taper. We had a pretty heavy day here. Still ascending intensity on this week 3 tertiary day. And the only thing I did on this Thursday was, instead of doing a top triple, I just had him do a single and slightly less back downs and then pull accessory work, and bench went really, really well on that Sunday. But the biggest thing I learned here, and the things that did not work in our prep, is 1, deadlifting twice a week did not work. 2, higher intensities on deadlift work, on rep work, did not go well. He actually tended to handle singles a lot better than he was able to handle higher RPE rep work. Like you can see here, he sputtered out hard on this rep work really, really quick. But when we did singles, he was able to handle that decently well. You can see here, this is the week 3 after he sputtered out, and this was a little bit harder. But then once we pulled back and took away that day, okay, the next week it started to normalize, and we were pretty good. He seemed to be able to handle singles decently well. It was the volume that really, really beat him up. So I do. We're going to get to later about where I think he does need some rep work on deadlift, but we need to be a bit more intentional about how we go about it. He can't be handling higher RPEs very frequently. And then probably the biggest thing I learned, he can't handle the prolonged singles on squat. That was obviously an experiment since he had never done singles in prep. That was something I wanted to be able to kind of get an idea of. And it worked really well at first, but then once we did a second block of it, it did not go so well. So something about doing singles 2 blocks in a row was something that we needed to not do moving forward. What did work well was basically everything we did on bench, which frankly I don't think was anything magical. It was mainly him benching more like a raw lifter, increasing frequency to 3 days, and that was just shooting things up. And really, we didn't push too hard. I mean, you can see here, if we're looking at like RPEs, 6, 6.5, 6, 6, sub 6, 6, 6.5. We really weren't even pushing very hard. It was pretty easy for him. So I think we have a lot of room to be able to take pretty much this model on bench press and start to increase the average intensity in RPEs, because I don't think he was getting beat up, and I think he can definitely handle a bit more. So going into the actual meet, let's look at the list. We looked at some of them so far. So squat, he hit 315 on his second attempt. Our plan was to hit 315, and then from there maybe go 332 to 335. Pretty big jumps, but because he's using such heavy weight, those jumps seem a lot bigger because disproportionately the percentages are higher. As well as 2, just because he is lifting so much weight, wanted to conserve a little bit more energy for that third attempt by going on a little lighter on that second attempt. So he noted to me on squats they felt shaky. Not just that strength wasn't, I mean, strength wasn't absolutely great, but he noted they felt really shaky on the walkout. He felt really unstable. I think the equipment he was using was a little bit different than he used in his training, but either way, I don't think he was trained or peaked super well. And you can see here, he can hit a grinder of a squat. We knew he could do that. He was able to get it, fortunately, but again, squat just didn't play out very well in the day based off of now in hindsight knowing a lot of things, but knowing one, he can't handle those prolonged singles. For bench press, went super well. Hit 507. We went 230. The original plan was maybe 232, but we just went a little bit more conservative since squat didn't go as well to get that PR on the board. And I'm going to show you in just a second. He actually YOLO'd the week after and was able to hit a very nice bench single. But here's 507 for a nice PR. You can see here how that left arm still lags behind a little bit, but not as bad as it used to be. And I'll just show you now. Post meet, he had a little bit of fun, and here is a 520-pound bench. That is more of an all-out grinder. Maybe a little bit shorter pause, but I mean, I have very much confidence he probably had 232.5, maybe even 235 meet day. But either way, that's going to be blown away in future meets because I think we're going to be able to add a lot to his bench press. And then, as I already showed, if this will work, this was his second attempt deadlift. He went 8 for 9 on the day and just missed that third attempt at 315. That 315 was to give him a slight total PR. So unfortunately, he did not total his PR, which a lot of that just came from the fact that squat did not go as we had hoped, because squat really was just the best the block prior, and the squat singles building up or doing 2 consecutive blocks of squat singles did not go well. So things that we learned. He needs more rep work on squats for the most part. I'm actually going to skip ahead to one of my points, but I reached out to Marcellus even before, like in prep, I had reached out to him, but we talked a lot after this because I see a lot of similarities between Preston and Marcellus's clients, Ashton and Jamar. Jamar being the fact that they're very similar in their body types and leverages. If you look at Jamar, really good squatter, and proportionately and leverage-wise not as good at deadlift, as well as Jamar really struggled with the same thing that Preston has struggled with, which is the issue with that sticky lockout. Looks like he could pull anything off the floor, but gets really, really sticky at lockout really quick. And a lot of the things I was already thinking Marcellus was able to confirm. One being that Jamar had a lot of positional issues, which that was something we had talked about even prior, and we had talked about what they did to fix that, and that was some things that I tried to work on with Preston, which a lot of it just came back to slack pull. But two, apparently, was also a thing with Jamar that they needed to change his grip width, so that just confirmed what I was already thinking, that we needed to mess around with his grip width. But looking more about body type and then weights lifted, while Preston is not quite where Ashton is, they are pretty similar, especially on squat. And a lot of the things I was doing, I found that really lined up well with Ashton when I was talking to Marcellus. But one of the big things Marcellus found is that in some prior preps, Ashton, when they did two blocks of singles in a row, just like I did with Preston, it wouldn't go as well on meet day. So exactly what I was thinking was confirmed there if we're using Ashton as a bit of a comparative model, that I believe for the VA Pro and for the Arnold, they did more of like a 3-2-1 model that Marcellus likes to use, where they didn't actually hit their heaviest single until the day of the meet. They hit doubles the block prior, use the progress on doubles to gauge what they then likely can shoot for in singles. And for both the VA Pro and for the Arnold, squat peaked a lot better. I mean, Arnold went fantastic there. So that's very much a model I was going to go to. We've got a decent amount of time now until nationals, so we're going to experiment with multiple rep ranges. But first, you can see here I'm going back to fours, and I've kind of got a model where we're going to kind of go fours, threes, twos, and then ones, and kind of see how that goes and plays out, so I can get some experimenting of rep ranges and see how it goes. Within that, they can make a whole video. Actually, I'm going to have that eventually on Powerlifting Now, talking about kind of updated approach to periodize or block periodization, where a lot of the back off rep work is not going to change, only the top set rep work is going to change. But you can see here, after the meet, one of the things we're going to be doing is ascending sets, because one, I already knew he did really well with those, but two, going back to his training that he did when he was doing the equip programming, was solely ascending sets. Preston had never done a back off set before ever on squat. It was only ascending sets. So we're going to lean into that a little bit more, where we're going to do ascending sets followed by some light back off work that is percentage based. You can see here percentage based back off work, and then it's just going to drop 7.5 kilos a week from where I programmed it on that last week. And then by the final week, then we're going to take away that ascending set, prioritize that top set, and push a bit more before a deload week. Second, keeping the high bar pause squats on that Wednesday, again, using Ashton, Bob, and a lot of Marcellus' clients and getting some feedback there. They were, I mean, without even having talked about this prior, I was using high bar squats in a large reason, for one, to manage fatigue and loading on this day, but two, since he's working at a commercial gym, I just don't know if squatting low bar super heavy is going to go well, because the bar whip and how much he has to load is going to be crazy. So high bar squat made a little bit more sense. And so what I did to manage fatigue a little bit more and allow him to push this day a bit more, because really, if we're looking back at some prior blocks, this day was always pretty easy, even though he's rating the 7 RPE there. And what did he rate it here? 6. Yeah, 6 here. It was always really easy on this day. So I want to start pushing the actual relative intensity, aka the RPEs, a little bit more on this day, but be able to self-limit through high bar and then pausing, which pausing actually doesn't self-limit him that much, because of the way he squats with a very controlled style and wider. He can about pause squat, but he can regularly do. But I think this will just be a bit of a way to kind of help self-limit, be able to push this day a little bit more, but then keep the higher rep back downs kind of static here. We may not change off of 2x7 too much. We might go to 6s and just flirt between 6s and 7s. If you're familiar with Marcellus's model, actually, he will put like 7s on this day, or 8s, or whatever it may be for his lifters, and it stays the same for 3 blocks in a row. The back offs actually never change, only the actual numbers change, where every single block, it'll be slightly higher each week, just to slightly increase that average intensity. So we got the high bar pause squats here. Going in the bench, not a whole lot of change, other than I changed his training maxes. I made this day on this tertiary day a little bit more difficult, and I made it competition bench versus Larson bench press, and then just continuing to push on this Thursday. So just trying to slowly increase that average intensity. For deadlift, I do think we need to do more than just singles, but we also need singles practice. So what he's actually got is kind of an ascending set model, where we're going to do a 3x1 with a weight that's pretty light. That never really gets too heavy for him, 257.5, but it's going to be something where at least we're going to get some practice with singles with a heavy enough weight that it can somewhat transfer, and then go into some rep work, but keeping it pretty darn light at first, and then doing a ramp up. So I told him even weeks 1, 2, and 3 probably go pretty conservative and somewhat sandbag, and I'd rather him just make a bigger ramp up into week 4. But again, since this is the first time we're ever going to run rep work on his primary deadlift day, it's going to be a little bit of an experiment where I've got to learn. And so from there to back off work is going to be all percentage based, keeping that relatively low so we can kind of get an idea of kind of what to do here. So, but I want to do some rep work, and I want to figure out how to way to get rep work in, because I do think he just needs a little bit more training volume on deadlift, because while singles didn't go bad, I don't think they were necessarily improving his deadlift. They were only like a utilization tool to get intensity and to work on technique, but we need something that kind of drives volume and maybe reduces the absolute loading on deadlift, so we can be able to find something that can kind of drive actual strength a bit higher. So as I mentioned, we're going to widen that deadlift grip a little bit more. I already showed the video kind of going over that. I think that's actually about it. We talked about, I already talked about having those conversations with Marcellus, things that we're going to be doing there, where we keep as well as, like I already mentioned, we're going to keep these absolute intensities or the intensities on the top sets pretty decently high. We're going to work some pretty heavy sets, but we're going to keep the back downs pretty sub max based off of a training max, because you'll see here as well, you'll see he'll hit a pretty heavy set. And then by the back downs, the 195 or pause sets are feeling harder to him than that single did, just because of either one, maybe there's some type of like psychological or arousal drop off. There's just not as much intent or motivation. That happens to a lot of people. But two, when you're lifting this heavy of a weight, a lot of times it just kind of beats the crap out of you, and it's really hard to kind of maintain that same level of strength throughout all of those back off sets. From there, the only other thing is we really didn't have time to do what I call a normalized block structure, because like I said, we kind of had this meet timeline, and I started running these 4-week blocks. You'll see here, it was a 4-week block, and he would hit this heavy set on this Sunday, or heavy day on the Sunday, and then the end of week 4 would actually, the rest of week 4 would be kind of a deload. I want to get to more of a normalized block structure where it's going to be the normal 4 weeks, trains all the way throughout, and then we're going to deload on that 5th week, and I want to kind of see how that works for him, to kind of determine a multitude of things. But another video coming out on Powerlifting Now is going to be my full breakdown of peaking, and one of the things I'm going to talk about on peaking is using this block structure a lot to determine how we're going to peak. Are we going to hit his heaviest lifts in training and then have a taper week, or are we going to continue to have that week 4 Sunday just be his meet day and train into it? That's something I've yet to determine. We need a bit more time, and this timeline going into nationals with having I think 27 weeks now is going to give us a lot more time to experiment and get some ideas of what we need to do. So hopefully this gave you some good insight into kind of my thought process and what I've learned, what I didn't do as well of a coach on a coaching job, and some mistakes I made leading into the Arnold prep of why we had not a terrible meet, but not a meet up to expectations of what we really thought we might have after that second block. Some things I learned and being able to gather data, because this was a learning experience for me, coaching an equipped lifter, turned raw, coaching someone who didn't have a lot of past training data, coaching someone who was a 110 kilo lifter, who had leverages and characteristics that were different from anyone I coached. So this was all kind of what was going through my head of trying to be able to make adjustments and learn from this, and then continue to add to my arsenal of things and tools of what we can do. So hopefully you like this style of video. I don't know how often I'll do this. Like I said, this is a special case because Preston was someone that has a lot more entailing into like a meet recap and my coaching perspective moving forward. So I really thought a YouTube video could be beneficial. But make sure, give this video a like. If you don't follow Preston, where's it at? Go give him a follow. Bench press ton makes sense. The guy's a strong bench presser, so give him a follow to be able to watch his training and see kind of how these things that we're doing progresses. I'm sure I'll be posting on Instagram some information regarding his training as well, and what worked and didn't work, and continued kind of information there. But otherwise, make sure to subscribe, like the video, share it, subscribe to Powerlifting Now if you have not already, because that's where most of my videos are going to be uploaded now, if not all of them. But otherwise, I will talk to you all later. Peace.